Greetings and welcome to another episode of Q Points Podcast. I'm DJ Sir Daniel.
And my name is J. Ray, sometimes known by my government as Johnny Ray Cornegay III. And Sir Daniel, we're about to have a really important conversation.
J. Ray, I have a question for you, a serious question. Does hip hop have a drug problem?
Ooh, that is a heavy question. I do think we are at a point in hip hop culture where we really do need to be having serious questions about like substance use. So yeah, I think hip hop does. I think it does.
Yeah, I'm going to say it does. I think we've been kind of dancing around the subject for years because yes, hip hop has definitely had this weird relationship with drugs and controlled substances. And I think it's time we've had an intervention.
And we wanted to really bring in someone who can help us parse through the challenges as it relates to substance use, addiction, and recovery. And so we have a guest. So we're excited to welcome Terrence Walton from NAADAC, the Association for Addiction Professionals. Terrence, welcome to Q Points. How are you?
Thank you for being here.
Hey, it is my honor and pleasure to be here. Been looking forward to talking to you gentlemen for a while. Glad we're doing it right now.
Yes.
Absolutely. Terrence, can you please tell us a bit about the work of NAADAC, the Association for Addiction Professionals?
Well, I'm happy to do that. You know, when I was listening to your all's little dialogue a minute ago, and, so Daniel, you began by asking the question, does hip hop have a drug problem? And it's almost like whatever the subject was, you could have said, do lawyers have a drug problem? Is there a problem? And the answer probably would have been yes. And that's part of the reason why organizations like NAADAC, the Association for Addiction Professionals, exist. NAADAC represents everyone out there who some part of what they do is helping people or communities break free and stay free from addiction. So in practical terms, that means addiction counselors. That means people who deliver primary prevention services, those who are trying to keep people alive and well, whether they use drugs or not, those who do harm reduction services, people with lived experience, people in recovery themselves who are now professionals helping others to recover. Listen, even, like people who work in academic institutions and who are in addiction studies programs that are helping to educate the addiction workforce. NAADAC exists to support them, to help develop them, to equip them. We are a 501c6, which means we're a nonprofit who can also lobby. So we employ lobbyists, government relations firm to help be sure that there are policies and legislation and funding to help people go forward. So that's kind of who we are. Been around for 50 years, more than 50 years, I think 53 to be exact, always doing the same thing, even as drug trends change.
Yes.
And as we've innovated and finding new ways to equip, empower, and develop the addiction professional workforce.
Wow. Thank you so much for that introduction to the work of NAADAC, the really important work. And I think that actually leads into the first question. Can you talk a bit about, from your perspective, how the approach to addiction treatment has changed for communities, in particular Black communities? Because when we think about it, Sir Daniel and I, as we were preparing for this conversation, we talked about the 70s and the heroin era, coming out of the Vietnam War, and then moving on to the crack era in the 1980s. And then now, especially because we do a lot of, our work in hip hop and talking about music with the lean and kind of the pill and the meth culture. Can you talk a bit about how addiction treatment has changed over the years?
Well, that's a great question, Jay Ray. And one of the benefits of being a part of an organization that's been around so long and being a person who's been around in the field for more than 30 years, I've seen and been a part of some of that trend, sort of that transition, that growth, that continuum. I grew up during the crack epidemic, as a kid and a young man. And so I had a chance to experience and see the impact on communities, on my community, on people I care about and love. And so I wasn't yet a professional, but I understood sort of the impact and the fear and the despair that was happening. And so especially in that era, it was every community impacted, including communities of color, was demanding action. We were demanding relief. And initially that came in the form of tougher drug laws,
Yep.
and lots of people were getting locked up, and that might have been okay, except most people who get locked up end up coming back out as they should, and then going back in. And so especially during the height of the crack epidemic, there was a real focus on sort of law enforcement and hoping we could jail our way out of that problem. And of course that wasn't possible. And so there, at the same time as there was an increase in like law enforcement responses, there was also funding of initiatives that was designed to help make treatment more accessible and effective and more available. But part of the problem there, and this is not a criticism, it just is what it is that most of the treatment approaches that existed, like let's say 40 years ago, most of them had primarily, if they're research-based at all, had primarily been researched on people who look other than the three of us. People that were not Black, were not of a minority group. Most were men. And some of that stuff does work. Some of the interventions that were developed at that time applies across cultures, but some of them didn't. And if anything has changed as we progressed over time, there's been a greater acceptance of the fact that one size does not fit all. And there's, addiction is addiction. It happens in the brain, but it affects all areas of life. And there's lots that contribute to people getting sick and getting well. And a lot of that is about culture and values and beliefs and expectations in any culture. And so the big progress, I think, has been the recognition that none of us who care about this issue, and especially none of us who make a living out of helping people to get and stay well, can escape the fact that we have to understand the uniqueness of the diverse communities we serve in order to serve them well. So that has resulted in not a plethora, but a variety of interventions that have been researched on communities of color. There's a couple of really interesting interventions that utilize hip hop culture to help treat and prevent addiction. So that's been a big change. But I should say that, even though the drugs have been very different, we went through the first heroin epidemic, or one of the first ones, the crack epidemic. Alcohol is always a constant. The meth piece, the stuff that's happening now. They're different substances, but one way or the other, they're all really designed to do the same thing. And all of them, not necessarily equally, but all of them have the potential to get people from the point where they're not just getting high, they're getting hooked.
So listening to everything you said, and specifically around the cultural competency aspect of your work,
Right.
J. Ray and I, we, like J. Ray said, we've had this ongoing discussion about, one, within our community, there was a time that being accused of being on that stuff was a no. That was something that, we prided ourselves in not being the addict or the junkie, not being the crackhead. It was okay, we were the crack dealer, but you don't want to be the crackhead, because you don't want to be doing favors for $5 in order to get a hit. That was part of the cultural code, in a sense, when it came to drugs. But we still have this very weird relationship. I've said to J. Ray, we've had eras of drugs, like we said. You had your heroin, then you had your coke, and then of course marijuana, weed has always been in the mix.
Yep.
And I think, except for the people who were lacing their marijuana, those people got hooked on other substances a lot harder. But then in the mid 90s, I know that we had this huge resurgence of marijuana culture within hip hop. And one of its biggest figures, of course, is Snoop Dogg, who has gone on to transcend hip hop and become just a cultural icon. So I think it's just so funny how we've been able to have this kind of relationship with drugs where it's like we're into it, but we're not, or at least we don't want to talk about it. Would you say, I have two questions. Would you say we have been able to be a little bit more free about our use amongst each other as far as saying, that I may partake in this or that and joke around about it? And then also, within the hip hop culture, in an industry that often glamorizes drug use, what strategies can help artists recognize and address addiction before it becomes life-threatening? Because I think that's the thing that we're seeing the most is a lot of young people are being taken out. People younger than us are being taken out by their drug use.
Wow, that's a lot, man, and all of it's important. So interesting that you talk about that transition in the mid 90s. And so I noted that too, because that's when I sort of entered the field. That's when I became, when I was on the grind as a drug counselor, learning addiction, learning how to help and all of that. And I was working with young people, was working with teenagers. And I've watched the stats of drug use over time. There's a national household survey that's been done forever that people acknowledge, confidentially they've used in a certain time period, et cetera. And consistently for decades prior to the mid 90s, the one group that reported the lowest levels of drug use, including alcohol use, including marijuana use of any group, was Black young people. The lowest. It's almost the only measure out there where consistently we rated higher, that our results were more favorable than every other group. Listen, when I was in high school, and again, I'm probably got a couple years on y'all, probably. When I was in high school or grade school, doing drugs was what those white boys did. We didn't do that. That just wasn't a thing. We tend to get into that later on in life, but not while we still in school.
Right.
Well, that began to change. I began to watch the stats change. I began to watch them change. And even then, not being a professional, not having a lot of research understanding, I connected the greater acceptance and greater use of, at that time, marijuana among Black youth because of hip hop culture. And I, by the way, embraced it, used hip hop culture in my groups, thought that, in fact, used some of the songs that glamorize weed in order to get a conversation going and getting people to voice what they're feeling and doing. And it was useful. But I have no doubt that was it wasn't art reflecting life, it was art impacting life. I'm sure that's true. And there was a widespread understanding, a belief that you could not get hooked on marijuana. And I don't think marijuana is the most evil thing out there. I'm never on that. I wasn't on that soapbox back then. It's not about that. But there was a wide belief that you can't really get hooked on that. Several folks found out differently, and hey, y'all may not remember this, but the one movie that sort of convinced people, I guess you can get hooked on weed, was Friday, the first one.
Yeah, the first one.
Smokey.
Yeah, Smokey. Kids started talking about that. And I guess you can get hooked. But my point is that while I'm certainly happy that fewer kids today, fewer young people today are getting locked up and getting criminal records because of marijuana. I do recognize that our greater involvement in what for many turn out to be harmful drug use really happened as a part of the hip hop culture for all the good that it did. So that I think is absolutely true. And so, like, one of the things that we do as addiction professionals, those of us who counsel and assess, and I don't do that anymore, but I represent folks who do, is there's something called recovery capital. One of you should have somebody come in and talk about recovery capital in the Black community. And recovery capital is like the resources, external and internal factors that influence the likelihood that a person, if they start using drugs, will end up having a problem with it. And if they do develop addiction, their probability for getting better. Recovery capital, the higher your capital, the higher your probability of getting better. And one of the areas, one of the elements of recovery capital is like whether you're part of a culture or subculture that embraces drug use. And the more extent that is true, then you are much more likely to get involved in substances, and the likelihood of breaking free is tougher as long as that particular culture or subculture has significant influence on you. So all that is real. It doesn't demonize anything. It just states this is kind of what we're dealing with. So I think part of the key to helping people to recognize, whoa, I may be getting in trouble with this before it's too late, is not to try to counter the glamorization of drugs by demonizing them. But this doesn't work, you feel me?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and this has unlocked a memory for me. So I have never had a substance use issue with drugs. I did have a period of time when I felt like I was drinking too much. So substance use on that end. What's interesting is what you just unlocked for me. And this is one of the oldest memories I had, going back to kind of what Sir Daniel was talking about earlier, where you didn't want to do it. I remember my mother specifically, and it was involving music. It was when Marvin Gaye was killed, right? And I remember the conversations being had in my house around, oh, he got all messed up in that stuff, and it affected him, and blah blah. And that's why it's bad, and that's why we can't have these folks out here. When I see him with the glasses on, I know. It was just a whole lot of no. Yeah, this is the way to be, not like this, right? And so you sit to that point that sits in you, where it's just like you're trying to counter this thing that's considered bad with these models that are considered good, and it's just like, and that's not real. I didn't know until I was in my 20s that, like, oh, folks who are using substances are just using substances you're drinking. They may not be doing that. They might be doing something else. It's just different. So yes, no, I absolutely agree with what you were saying.
And so, like, as a field in a society, we sort of discovered that partly was because of research that showed, like, prevention programs that were based on educating you about how harmful drugs were just miserable failures. It just didn't work. Kids would listen to that and become more interested in trying before they become more intrigued by it, and the sort of the basis of that life means one or two things. Either, at that age, you're not worried about that because you don't think it's going to happen to you. That's true. But check this out. Here's something else that I noticed, especially because all the adolescents I worked with were inner city youth, who had tough circumstances they were dealing with, like, right then, not just in their past. They had past traumas and current factors that put them at risk. So some of them, they weren't scared of drugs because they didn't think it would happen to them. They sort of had this myth about invincibility. They'd be invincible. But another portion of them, maybe even the larger portion, they didn't think they were invincible. They had sort of this belief that none of this really matters because I'll either be dead or in jail, before I'm in my mid-20s. And so it was not an invincibility, it was like inevitability that that doesn't matter because, all right, if that's going to happen, at least I can have some fun before I die or get locked up. That was real. And sometimes through like hip hop culture, through helping the youth and maybe teaching me, hey, let's dissect these lyrics. What do these lyrics mean? Sometimes they'll allow them to give voice to that.
Yeah.
To recognize their own sense of fatality and help them to begin to talk about how does that affect your choices today. It was very powerful, and I didn't even know what I was doing. But really, I was too new. But it worked. And so my point here is that I don't like to glamorize, but the antidote is not to demonize them. It's to recognize they are what they are, to recognize that people use for reasons. People use either to feel good or feel better. People use either for pleasure or stimulation or relief or escape. All those are legitimate needs. On any given week, brothers, I feel the need for stimulation. Like I need to do something, change the routine a little bit. I feel the need for pleasure. I feel I've got a tough job, great job, but a tough job, and I got school-age kids and a wife I'm trying to keep happy and a lot of responsibilities. So I want just to have some fun and feel good. I also sometimes feel need to escape what I can't change, for a minute or two, for a weekend. And I also sometimes feel a very legitimate need to get relief from what I'm feeling inside right now. And all those are reasons why people try substances and why sometimes, depending on the circumstances, they get hooked. And recognizing that as a part of the human condition, the risk of being alive and not some huge character or moral flaw reduces shame and reduces the likelihood that people will recognize when they're going on the wrong path, and if they have fallen over the cliff, not be too ashamed to reach out.
J. Ray, listening to Terrence speak reinforces what I'm always saying on here about how the general decline or decrease in empathy amongst us is affecting us in more ways than we understand.
Yes.
And as somebody who works in the field and is working to help people modify their behavior or for harm reduction, you have to have some sort of a level of empathy for the person you're working with and realizing holistically that this is a human being that's experiencing something. And I think for over the decades, J. Ray, the constant is that this world is this world is on fire, and it's always been on fire.
Yes.
And like every decade that we spoke of on a national level, an international level, and right here in our backyards, we were going through something collectively, whether it was the Vietnam War, whether it was Reaganomics, whether it's what were they blaming Obama for? The HIV epidemic, whether they were blaming the economic status that when Obama took over, the recession.
The recession.
Why could I not think of the word recession? But yes, so there was a collectively, there's always something going on. And depending on how you like you said, Terrence, depending on your community, and your predisposed levels of addiction, because I think all of us have some type of level of addiction. For some of us, it's food. For the other people, it's other things, gambling, money, all that kind of stuff. But what I'm saying is, you have those natural predispositions, then you have the stuff that's going on externally that's affecting you. So what I've noticed, and we've said this, J. Ray, in the past decade or so, what we've noticed is that the music has gotten really sad. The BPMs have slowed down, and it's gotten very sinister at times, and other times it's just a very bleak, and it's matching what's going on in the world. And so, you mentioned administrations.
Yes.
This administration is no different than when we had Reagan in the office, all of those things. This administration just recently got rid of HIV prevention programs. So God knows what kind of fallout we're going to have from that. But this administration, how is the current administration's policies impacting substance use services, particularly for marginalized communities?
Well, listen, it's still really early in our new situation. And even as early as it is, there are real indications that that all of us who care about Black communities, who care about other minority communities, all of us who are really invested in being sure that young people have the opportunity to thrive, and to have a level playing field. And all of us who want to be sure that people who need help can get that help, and help that's actually designed for them. All of that is at risk. Upfront, unapologetically at risk. And here's what I mean real quick. And I don't want to listen, addiction professionals, they probably tend to lean, more progressive, but not exclusively. Drug counselors in red states, many of them voted for Trump. They're not just Republicans, they're MAGA Republicans. That's the truth. So this isn't really political. I've got political ideas. That's not what this is about. This is about, as addiction professionals, our code of ethics, our scopes of practice, our mission statements require us to deliver care as best we can that is suited for the person, the family, the community in front of us. It's a requirement.
Right.
And 2 executive orders, and there are lots of executive orders that have occurred since January 20th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. Lots of them. 2 of them, back-to-back days, one on the 20th, one on the 21st, are already having and promise to have a huge impact on marginalized populations being able to access the kind of care that they need from people who look like them and have some similar experiences. It's the executive order that reversed the EEO stipulations from 1965.
Yeah.
As well as the second executive order, and I may have gotten the order wrong, but the other executive order that essentially made it clear that not a dime of federal money, not one dime of federal money can be spent on anything that remotely looks like it's designed to address diversity, equity, or inclusiveness. In some detail, with a number of examples of things you can't do and words you can't use, and any initiatives that exist right now, and there are lots of them that exist right now with federal funding, have to stop. And despite all the court actions, those things have stopped by and large. Wow. And so the many organizations, the nonprofits and community-based organizations that found a way to get some federal funds so they can reach hard-to-reach populations, they are either actually having to purge their websites, having to try and do things really different than they sought out to do, find alternate funding, or close down. Man. So if this continues and we don't find ways to rise above this, because a lot of damage can be done in 4 years. If that doesn't change, then we're at a point where all of the progress we made in being sure that we reach all communities, including those that represent marginalized, discriminated against populations, that all of those efforts will have to cease, and we'll begin to get back to the way things were, where we can't do research even to see what works better for certain people, and that people will be getting treatment that they hope will be the right ones for them, but increasingly we won't know that's true. And what other point, because NAADAC is really about the workforce, about finding a diverse workforce, because listen, anybody can help anybody, but if you're seeking help, and if you walk into an outpatient treatment center, you're a Black, older man who recognizes you having some trouble, and your caseworker or your caregiver, someone said, "Hey, you should go here, talk to somebody," and you walk in that, and you don't see anybody who looks like you.
Yeah.
Research shows you're less likely to engage there.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
all of that is at risk. So there's no doubt about it. For instance, NAADAC has taken a position that while, we won't use any federal funds in any way that's not permissible by the executive branch or the judicial branch, but we're going to use the fees are the dues our members pay, and our affiliate fees and revenues from our conferences. We're going to use all of that, not just to continue our efforts to have a diverse and qualified workforce and to be sure we know how to deliver culturally humble and respectful care, not just continue efforts, we're going to intensify them. We're going to increase them. Because so much, so Daniel, the way you began, like there's a lot happening right now that'll cause despair. That'll cause people to be in pain and fear. And that environment is ripe for addiction. Well, at the same time, marijuana is more available than ever. Other substances, are more available than ever. That's a potentially lethal combination. And so NAADAC is one of those organizations that, even if it means that we won't be qualified for future federal funding, we have no choice but to lean in and trying to continue to recruit people into the workforce who can serve and who represent multiple communities, and being sure we are doing our part to be sure those who are treating addiction have what they need to treat our communities appropriately. And there are ways to do that. So this is real, and there's no doubt about it. And I think I mentioned earlier that I think hip hop culture, while on one hand it glamorizes, certainly weed and alcohol, certainly, it's but at the same time, it also gives voice to angst and gives voice to injustice and gives voice to lots of emptiness. And that is valuable.
Yes.
In the right hands, if it can be processed and people can connect with it and then find a place of healing.
J-Ray, excuse me, rutabaga. If I may, J-Ray, hop in real quick and ask this one last question. We were talking about, it's funny, I was just privy to an organization on a college campus that is actually celebrating and talking about more Black men getting into the field of social work for this very reason, for the same reason of visibility. The likelihood that you see somebody that looks like you, the more likely you are going to to receive help or be open to receiving any kind of change. And I've wondered over the years, I've always heard that with the onset of the opioid epidemic, that we were going to see more help because of and more support because opioids were affecting other communities more than Black communities, right? So and in my old work, I would see, we had the Narcans readily available, for, and stuff like that just wasn't here when people were, getting strung out on crack or to drinking lean and all of those things. So in your work, did you see that disparity? Like when the opioid epidemic began to fluctuate, did you see, people were more than willing to put in funds and resources to make those things happen, as opposed to, before and after when other communities were doing their thing and killing themselves, basically?
So Daniel, if I didn't see that, I'd lie. I mean,
Okay.
I'd have my head in the sand on purpose. It was obvious because remember, I said I started in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw and experienced as a young addiction professional, I experienced the stigma on people I treated and the stigma on what I did for a living. So I experienced it. Listen, addiction becomes stigmatizing for lots of reasons, including that at its worst, when addiction is at its worst, people do really stigmatizing things sometimes. So I get that. I get how mothers who end up deserting kids they love, and fathers who end up not taking care of families they're responsible for because of addiction. I get why that's stigmatizing. I get it. But the reaction back then, wasn't compassion driven, and we gave lip service to addiction as a disease, not a moral failing, but in practice, the law enforcement response and the shame that came from being addicted, especially to crack, was out of this world. The contrast to the more recent opiate epidemic was stark. And I'm gonna tell you, gentlemen, that caused great resentment among people who have been along for that ride.
Yeah.
People who themselves are in long-term recovery and remember how they were treated at their worst. Professionals, especially Black professionals and brown professionals who were treating people, it caused great resentment. I get that. In fact, I spent some time after letting people vent saying, all that is true, but let's make the most of that now. Now there's this greater acceptance, and there was an influx of funds that may change soon, but there was an influx of money to do all kinds of projects. I said that also can apply to us. I said we can both recognize this ain't fair, but let's make the most of it and be sure our communities are benefit from it as well, because it is a myth that the opiate issue only affected white communities. That's a myth. It affected us too.
Absolutely.
They
It
had a
still
more
is,
severe
yes.
response. It absolutely, in fact, while other overdose rates are going down, ours aren't going down at the same rate as others. That's true today. And so, yeah, you're dead on it there. And that's true. But probably, maybe it's my generation, but I get mad and then I say, okay, all right, well, that's life. Life ain't fair. People are not fair. And now let me see how I can make the most of this. And the real risk right now is that even though we are still dealing with a multiple drug crisis that's still taking lives and livelihoods and breaking up families every single day, there's the real risk that even with a president who doesn't drink and a head of the Department of Health and Human Services who is in recovery, even with that being true, there's a likelihood that in order to, provide, mega tax breaks for higher income people and businesses, and in order to fund efforts to get immigrants out of the country, and this is way too political, but it's just the truth. So likelihood that a lot of the funding, if we can't stop it, if we can't prevent it, the funding to help people be able to access care is going to go away. One example, I don't want to bore everybody with stats, but one example, right now, the budget reconciliation, which is a way in Congress that the party in power can pass something without any opposition votes, that they have a package that calls for $800 billion in cuts from Medicaid. They say savings, but those are cuts.
It's
Medicaid,
heartbreaking.
man, in terms of, J-Ray, in terms of providing access to care for poor people, for marginalized people, that is the largest single provider. And no matter what is said, it's impossible to cut $880 billion, almost $1 trillion. You can't do that without dramatically cutting benefits. That is going to be felt on the ground. I'm concerned about some of the opiate money that's out there being reversed. I heard of an example where that's happened. So yeah, these are things that my organization, that NAADAC and our partners are trying to get in front of, trying to get to Congress people who are in power now to say, hey, this is how this is going to affect your community, but it's real. So the resentment about how addiction is viewed now because of the impact of the opiate epidemic, that's over. Now it's about, oh, wait a minute. We need to keep those gains in order for people to, keep being able to access care if they can't afford to pay for it themselves.
Man. Oh, okay. Thank you for laying all of that out. I think what you just shared is so incredibly important for folks to really understand. And that Medicaid thing really hits home. Sir Daniel knows all the stuff that's been going on in my world in the last month or two, right? So this is really, really important information. So thank you so much for putting an exclamation point on that. Okay, we do have a couple more questions for you that are going to be straightforward, but I gotta ask you this now. What is the sunshine? Where is your sunshine now? Because this all sounds so heavy.
Yeah.
What's your sunshine? Like, where are you getting your joy from these days? Before we ask you those last couple of questions.
Well, thank you for that, man. First of all, I am not like a professional. Sometimes that I'm a father, that I'm a husband, I'm a friend. It's all in one
You're
time.
all those things, right?
All those things, and so my daily struggle, my daily battle, like the battle of most people, including especially Black men. I know you're gonna be talking to someone about Black men soon, or have done. So I think that's important. We have a certain unique set of pressures that are not fully recognized. And my journey is never to forget what matters most and who matters most, to keep that in focus. First and foremost, the people who live in this house with me, the heartbeats that beat here that I'm responsible for, being sure that they are well, they are loved. I'm probably grandfather age, but I have school age children, including one who still wants to cuddle, and that reminds me, actually, this is all that matters. Yeah. And so that helps to keep me balanced, but it also makes me determined to do what I can while I still have health and breath and a platform to make a better world for him. If I have an 8-year-old son and an 11-year-old daughter, if my 8-year-old ever goes on the wrong course and ends up in trouble, I want there to be places he can go to get help, and people who care and understand and who have been trained and qualified to help him.
Yeah.
And so that makes me determined. And in my experience in life, that whatever the challenge is, no matter how hard it is, there is opportunity.
Yeah.
And so what this is doing to the community is to recognize, for a period of time, our government is going to be working against us again. That's just the truth.
It's just the truth.
And, we might get some relief at midterms, but we might not. We might not. And so it is forcing all of us in a position to do so, to look for ways to join together instead of competing, to work for common good, to find ways to fund the things we need funding from other sources. And it's resulting in all kinds of creative ways of approaching this. It also means we have to rely on the whole community, the faith community, churches, and other places of worship, and to help us help people. There's a huge peer movement where people with long-term recovery, either as volunteers or as professionals, are helping others. NAADAC is training family members to provide better help for people they love, because they may not be able to get help out there. That's what's going to come out of some of this, that as we try and get through this, we are going to find ways to help people, and that'll bring the best out of us. It also forces us to become efficient. us to run our businesses like businesses.
Yes.
And so none of that's what I wanted. But most days and some day in the week, I feel like it's hopeless. That means it's time to go to sleep. It's time to take a nap, take a break,
Naps are
and get up
gold.
and keep at it. And I believe that we will get through this, gentlemen. We're going to get through it. And our community will get through it because, frankly, I'm more worried about other communities because we're accustomed to this.
Yeah.
I mean, we're accustomed to it. Person, we just are. We're accustomed to it. We never, even when affirmative action at its best, that never meant that because I'm Black, I can be less qualified. It never meant that.
No.
It's lack of. No father ever said to their kid, because you're Black, or you don't have to worry as much. You just be sure you do the best you can, because they would say the opposite.
Literally has never been said.
It's the opposite. It's like, don't do what you see them doing. You won't get away with it. You have to be more prepared.
Yep.
And so this is the world we're accustomed to, and so it's in our genes. We've inherited from our ancestors the ability to prevail in spite of, and that's what's kicking in. And like podcasts like this helps to do that. Helps people to think about issues and to recognize, none of us have time to be high all the time. No, this is a different world. This is for real out here, and they love us to stay high and laid back, and they love that, just leaning, No, but we don't have time for that. We have to be as on our P's and Q's as we can, because this stuff is real.
Man. Okay. We're going to do two quick things. We're going to talk about how folks can support NAADAC, because we got to make sure that they do that. But
Okay.
How can we, as a culture, shift the narrative? Because like I said earlier, I was in my 20s when I finally figured out, like, people using substances in this way is not like, they're not like bad people. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're just people, right?
Right.
How do we shift the narrative culturally from viewing substances as like a moral failing to really understanding it as a health issue? Like, what is your perspective on how we move the needle in that way?
Well, I reference like churches and houses of worship and mosque and, places people work. I reference that on purpose because in communities of color, even for people who aren't religious, they don't go to church all the time. Churches and places of worship have some influence.
Yes.
And increasingly, churches and other places of worship have become a part of the solution, because they can also be the place where the guilt and the stigma exist as well. So part of what organizations like NAADAC does and other organizations out there at the community level, I hope will do, is to educate congregations about what addiction is, and what underlies it. Talks about the trauma that a majority of people who end up with severe substance use disorder, what they have encountered and how that is playing itself out in their choices. When we can recognize, how common addiction has been since the beginning of recorded history, and that's a reason. So it's about education. It's also recognizing that even at his or her worst, an addicted person is a human being with a set of hopes and dreams that could be realized. And that, like, for people who, let's say if you are religious, there's no higher calling than helping to set the captive free. So it's about educating, it's about engaging families, some of whom have loved ones who have burned their bridges and they've given up. And so helping to re-engage them and offering hope is important. Their progress has been made. The fact that as a society, we generally understand addiction better, and we generally have a more compassionate approach, that is helpful. being sure the Black community, our community is on board, is a priority. So, hey, I think that things like this are really helpful, increasing, especially younger people, podcasts and music helps to influence thinking. And I think we're on the right path. And I think folks in the hip hop community can help with that as well. I think they can help with that by helping to give voice to some of what people are feeling, so drugs become less necessary. People have ways to begin to feel again and to recognize when they're not feeling. I think that artists and entertainers have a role as well, who can reach people I can't reach. I think the many artists out there who are in long-term recovery should start talking about that.
Yeah.
Start saying, this is what my journey was. This is what this did to me. This is where I am now. I think all of that matters, man. It helps.
Man, oh man. So much. So Terrence,
Yeah.
thank you for being here. Thank you for the work that you do, and for all of the folks that you work with in the NAADAC universe. We got to get now Q points. We have to get connected to the NAADAC universe, right? This is like
yes,
important work. How can folks support the work that NAADAC is doing?
Well, listen, NAADAC is 14,000 members strong, but we need 14,000 more. It's just that simple. I hope to get federal funding. But I'm not holding my breath these days, because we're not letting up on the things that matter. So I encourage people to go to our website, naadac.org, naadac.org. Go with it, check it out. Most of the stuff there is free. We have hundreds of hours of webinars on every imaginable topic to educate people. That's available there. We also had an opportunity for you to join as a member at a relatively low cost. And as a member, you get a lot of extra stuff. Additionally, we need members. That is how we increasingly will be able to afford to lead nationally in opposition to those particular policies that threaten those of us who need help. So that's the main thing. Go to our website, check it out. My email's there. Send me an email. Let me know that you're doing that, and become a part of this movement by joining.
Man,
Mr. Terrence Walton, we appreciate you so much for sharing with our Q Points viewing and listening audience. NAADAC, the Association for Addiction Professionals, such a needed force within the community. And we can only say thank you. Thank you for sharing your time, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. And please make sure we will have the information posted on our socials, and along with this particular episode. And Jerry, I think that's it. I think we've done it. I think we some questions have been answered.
Yes.
I know that more things are going to happen, and I just hope, for the sake of this new batch of young people, this new generation of performers, that someone somewhere is on their side, actually.
Yes.
And will point them in the direction where they can receive help, even if it's from someone from NAADAC. Hopefully they'll run into someone like a Terrence Walton that genuinely cares about their well-being. So for Q Points Podcast, I'm DJ Sir Daniel.
My name is J. Ray, y'all. That's Terrence Walton. Thank you so much.
Terrence Walton.
Thank you, Sir Daniel. Thank you, J. Ray. I'm glad you did this. God bless you all.